is Bean to Barstool, a podcast that looks at the intersections of craft beer and craft chocolate. My name is David Nilsson. I'm a professional beer writer and an advanced cicerone, and the creator and host of this show. The music for this episode is by my dear friend, indie folk musician Anna P.S. You can find out more about Anna's music in the show notes or at her website, annapsmusic.com. You can find links and information about our guests in the show notes as well. I hope you enjoy this episode of Bean to Barstool. We focus a lot on inclusion chocolate on Bean to Barstool. Inclusions facilitate the pairing process, so we discuss them a lot when talking about pairing with craft beer, and we're often discussing unique ingredients and processes in chocolate making. But single origin dark chocolate is still the spiritual backbone of bean to bar chocolate, and I wanted to talk to someone who focuses entirely on those bars, offering complex flavor profiles from chocolate's base ingredient, cacao. Firetree Chocolate in the UK has been making single origin dark chocolate from primarily Pacific Island origins since launching 5 years ago, and they're among my favorite single origin makers. As much as I love their complex bars, I also love their beautiful packaging with its swirling colors and gold etching. Their motto is Rich Volcanic Chocolate, referencing the volcanic soil of the islands where their cacao is grown, and the vaporous, colorful clouds of color and the thin, rippling lava line of gold separating color from the black background of the label evoke the wonder of those origins. I sat down recently with Firetree's chocolate maker, Martyn O'Dare, to talk about Firetree and making chocolate that respects the nuances of each cacao origin and the farmers who grew it. Martyn came from big chocolate before jumping into craft, which he acknowledges most craft folks would consider the dark side, but he brings a career of knowledge to his current role, and there's much to learn from that experience. Listen in as Martyn shares the story of Firetree. Well, Martyn, thank you so much for joining me today. Before we get into talking about the story of Firetree and what you're doing there, tell me about the name. I know it's a reference to the cacao tree, but how did you decide on the name Firetree?
It does come back to cocoa. You're absolutely right. And we were thinking of a name for the company, David and I, and we went through a whole host of names. And we thought of some really good ones, but perhaps they'd been taken, or we thought of some really bad ones. And then I think after a couple of weeks, we came up with the idea, I can't remember exactly who, I'm sure it wasn't me, of the idea of Firetree. Imagine that you're sort of walking into a plantation where there's a lot of high palm trees and some cocoa trees in ripe harvest condition. And you've got those lovely reds, yellows, even a touch of green sometimes, but all these lovely sort of colors, and they sort of like baubles hanging off a tree. And when the evening sun catches it, to be honest, it looks quite ridiculous. It looks like somebody's gone and hung balloons on the tree because they are so bright in color. And then somebody said, well, it looks like the tree's on fire. So hence that. Also, that tied in very nicely with the fact that virtually all our chocolate is grown on volcanic soils, hence tying it back in. So perhaps there was a bit of marketing spin on there. But the idea is the sort of perception of the tree, and it links it back to the sort of volcanic soils.
Well, tell us a little bit about the story behind starting Firetree and what led you to do that.
Okay, so I've been in chocolate for a lifetime, really. I mean, getting on for 40 years. But most of that time, up until about, say, 2016, I had been working for larger businesses. I started off on a graduate program in a chocolate maker. By that, I mean an industrial chocolate maker who made chocolate to supply other chocolate users. And I spent a lot of time working in the factory, in the laboratory, in the R&D, commercial sites, normal sort of development program. And to be honest, I loved it. And I worked in these businesses and eventually became a manager on the technical and commercial side, and then site manager. All the time sort of still keep my hand firmly on the manufacturing, because that was really, I think, where I enjoyed it. And I worked for several companies, started a few businesses, but they're all quite large. You know, anything up to, say, in the UK, for example, 60,000 tons and a couple of 100,000 tons annually. A couple of the names of the businesses, you know, you would recognize them. But I did learn a hell of a lot about manufacturing, big scale manufacturing, cocoa processing, etc. And then about 2016, I'd been around the wheel, if you like, about 4 times, building factories, starting businesses, building factories, starting businesses. That I was actually becoming a little bit bored of it. I hate to say it, but there was one nagging problem I had, and that was the fact I'd come across some very good cocoa beans in my time in the last, say, 20 years. And we bought a small parcel of them, moved them through, and I realized that they're totally different in terms of taste. Usually, there were lots that would be brought in to say to be blended away into another recipe as a sort of slight flavor note. But generally, they just weren't available. And I had this thought that there is some damn good cocoa out there. I was really confident there was some good cocoa out there. So I really wanted to prove to myself that I could make good chocolate if I could find good cocoa. So 2016, basically off I went, set up a pilot line in the UK at Nottingham University and started doing some consultancy work. Which enabled me to travel out to the Pacific Islands, which was lovely because I was able to make my first visit to Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, all these lovely places. Meet the farmers, pick up the beans, bring them back to the pilot line, and test it. And while I was doing this, an old sort of business colleague of mine, David Zolman, came to see me with some beans he was working on in the Philippines. And he said, "Do you know anything about this cocoa from the Philippines?" I said, "No." I said, "As far as I know, it's non-existent almost. It's only producing a couple of thousand tons." And I said, "I'm a bit skeptical, but hey, I'll give it a go." So I ran some down the pilot line, and it was superb. And kicking the can down the road, if you like, a bit, we were talking, saying, "Well, have you tried this cocoa? Have you tried that cocoa?" And we were sitting there munching on our lovely cocoa, chocolate bars, and we said, "Well, why don't we start a business?" And that's really what started it all off. Was the fact that we had, I'd sort of found some good cocoa, and he brought some more along.
And what year was that you finally opened Firetree?
So we opened in 2018 and sort of got going 2019. We started in Peterborough in England in a relatively small scale, a sort of largish building, but a relatively small scale with 20-kilo roaster and so forth, just to get it going. And once we obviously got through that stage, we bought year by year more and more equipment. And we're not huge, but we're sort of, I guess, a good-sized bean to bar manufacturer.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned there, that you started out with those Pacific origins, and that's maintained your focus. You are still primarily working with Pacific origins. Tell me a little bit about the thinking behind focusing on that area of the world.
A couple of reasons. One is the introduction to the bean many years ago, which took me back to Papua New Guinea. And when I was out there and sort of looking at the amount of cocoa, I realized it was incredibly small. It was a rare product. You compare, say, to Ghana, 800,000 tons, Ivory Coast is a couple of 100,000. I mean, like Solomon Islands produces like 5,100 tons. Vanuatu, I think, produced about 1,400 tons. They're tiny, tiny volumes. But that it wasn't just so much the rarity, it was the fact that nobody was using them much then. And the flavor was amazing. And I wanted to know why the flavor was amazing. And I think, well, I'm still learning, to be honest, but my personal view is that the flavor comes mainly from the terroir and from the amazing skill levels of the farmers. I mean, not all cocoa from these places is wonderful tasting. Some of it goes to the mass market, but I think where it does grow well, the soil, this volcanic soil, just really allows these flavors to leap out. And as I say, the farmers, percentage of the farmers really go that extra effort, probably put in 50 days extra labor a year, and it shows. Give you an example, Solomon Islands, we buy from 3 islands out there, and they're only about maybe 50 miles apart. Now, on each of these islands, the farms are growing the same types of cocoa as cocoa which is brought in mainly in the 1920s, believe it or not. It's a mixture of Trinitera and Forastera cultivars. And they were brought in by basically British and German planters at those times, and they've more or less stayed the same. So the type of cocoa is virtually the same. The farming level is virtually the same. The farmers we work with are good. They know what they're doing. They know exactly when to harvest, how to ferment correctly, how to make adjustments if the weather's a bit off, and dry. So the variable is the land. Now, these little islands, the Solomon Islands, have popped up like Hawaii, like a chain of little islands. You can imagine an undersea volcano popping up out of the sea and forming a new landmass. And then a couple of 100,000 years later, another one pops up. I guess this is how the Ring of Fire formed. But each island, the magma is all slightly different. Soils are different. As they weather down to these immensely deep, rich volcanic soils, you get these different flavors coming through because, as I say, almost the same type of cocoa, same agricultural levels exhibited by the farmers. The variable is the land. And geologists will tell you, yeah, they're volcanic islands, but the magma that comes up is quite different, the mineral content in each one. So that really surprised me. Now, you can say within these islands, there's what we call good farmers and bad farmers. I don't mean that personally, but I mean in terms of the dedication, if you like, to really looking after the cocoa and getting the maximum out of it. And some farmers who are growing cocoa simply for the commodities market. So they grow it quick. They don't put much time into it, and they sell it onto the commodities market, and that's their choice, of course. But yes, it's fascinating to see this type of cocoa.
Are you able to explain, and this might be beyond the scope of what we can get into, but what is unique about volcanic soil that yields these unique cacaos? Like, is there something specific that we can look at in that soil that contributes to that terroir?
I would think mainly the mineral mix. I mean, if you analyze it, they're not, fortunately, not heavy metals. That's the first point. There's very, very, very low cadmium, for instance, and other heavy metals in this. But the mineral mix seems to be the key to it. They're very mineral-rich soils. When I've been out there, I've never seen a farmer using fertilizer. They just don't seem to need to use fertilizer. This is, to be honest, this has helped a little bit. And they do have an advantage, say, over Africa, where if you take Ghana, Ivory Coast, Nigeria, the population versus land mass is pretty high. You go to these islands, even though they're tiny, the population density is much, much lower. So the land pressure to sort of get maximum heavy yields out of the same soil is reduced. So the soil is not really hammered. And the way the plantations are laid out, you've got the 4 meters between the trees quite easily, and they're interspersed between sort of shade trees, mainly coconut palms. But you get the feeling of space there, and you can tell that the pruning and the access to the trees is a lot easier. And this gives, how can I say, I'm pretty sure that this access to good farming practices enables a great taste.
Sure.
As well as actually having the soil. So there's a lot of combinations in there. It's all box fermented as well. I mean, box fermenting gives you a lot more control.
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, Final Gravity Issue 5 is now available in the shop on beantobarstool.com. This 5th issue of our zine telling personal, human-centered stories from the world of beer is full of great articles. Bono Segudu tells the story of the South African beer style Umkombothi, poignantly explaining its role in her culture and the importance in her family's celebrations and milestones. Maria Krugliak writes about discovering the Portuguese half pint after moving to Portugal during the COVID-19 pandemic. Amanda Bruns and Obakeng Malope discuss the water spirit Mamuhaswa and the collaboration beer they brewed in her honor. These and numerous other stories fill the 56 pages of this zine. We've expanded it and added a few features for this issue. It's full color, full of lots of beautiful photography and art. Definitely check this out. It's on beantobarstool.com/shop. You can purchase this issue or subscribe, and you can always support us on Patreon and get extra perks as well. Cheers. Well, you mentioned distinction between these different islands. Is there any kind of commonality that you can identify for these different Pacific Island origins? Anything that sort of ties them together?
What, in terms of taste?
Yeah, from a sensory standpoint.
Yeah, they're complex. They're complex. By that, I mean, obviously, a lot of cocoa is complex, and a lot of cocoa is not particularly complex. What do I mean by that? It's a long flavor journey. You put a piece of chocolate in your mouth, and you're waiting for the start. The start is normally, obviously, a bit of a sort of initial burst of cocoa, slight sweetness, but then the flavors start to play their tunes. It's almost, I would say, like a journey. You'll get a first flavor flood of the first 5 to say 15, 20 seconds. And then all the flavors sort of become a little calmer, building to a second wave. And the flavors you get on in each wave and trough and each wave and aftertaste, complex and different. And I'm sure this is sort of part due to soil, part due to good cocoa, obviously, but also a hell of a lot to the fermentation.
So you're sourcing through direct relationships with all of these different farms?
Yeah,
that seems like an awful lot of legwork. So many individual farmers you're working with.
It is. I mean, setting it up first time, it was I think it was about a 6 to 8 week tour, just going to meet lots and lots of farmers. I mean, I was very lucky that I managed to get access to, if you like, the Cocoa Farmers Directory. Somebody who I knew was working in cocoa out in the South Pacific, and they introduced me to the Minister for Cocoa on these islands, and the sort of list of what were considered premium cocoa farmers. Now, I met lots and lots of farmers, and I went on to see many farms, a lot of which I was able to sort of discount immediately because perhaps they were drying the beans over the fire. Fire drying, as they call it, and I didn't buy from any of those because I couldn't risk the problem with smoke contamination. So that was fairly easy, if you like, deselection of quite a lot of farms, and then you're left with the farmers who dry correctly. They're all solar dried, whether it's under tents or out in the open and covered. So you're sure you're not going to get contaminated flavor. So you're down to about sort of a quarter by this time. And then visiting the farm, I was able to see for myself how they do it, how their plantations are laid out, and check for obvious things like, is there any child labor and so forth. But as you say, meeting all these farmers and then arranging for samples, I'd bring samples back, we'd do cut tests there, we'd sort of do what we could there, like we'd sort of cut the beans in half, do a cut test, smell it, look at it on the tree. I then came back with loads and loads of samples, ran them through the pilot line, which I still do, by the way. And then, if we like the cocoa, we bought it, set up a contract and buy it. Obviously, fortunately, most of this was set up pre-COVID because 2019 came along and travel stopped, or 2020 came along and travel stopped. So you couldn't really go out and meet new farmers. It's only just slowly coming back into operation. And it's not the easiest thing working with people on a different time zone and trying to communicate with them because, on some of the islands, they don't have mobile phone technology. Simply, there's just no signal. So you have to wait till they turn up in the mainland island, you can speak to them. So, yeah, initially, legwork is really difficult. Thereafter, it's not too bad.
How many farms are you working with now?
Okay, so about 15.
Why don't you pick one just as an example and tell us a little bit about that relationship and that story of that farm?
Okay, well, I mean, one's a really nice one, actually, Lucy in Makira. So Makira is one of the islands in the Solomon Islands. And I met Lucy on this on her farm, giving you an idea of the scope. There's one road on that island that runs for about 6 miles maybe maximum, and towards the end of that road is where Lucy's farm was. So between the road and the beach, that's where her farm is. And as I say, if you walk through her plantation, you're onto it. Think of Hawaii, the beaches with palms hanging over. That's exactly what it looks like. But Lucy's working there with her daughters and a few other ladies. Now, Lucy's farm is basically women only on that farm, which is interesting. I don't know where the men are, but Lucy grows her cocoa. She grows sufficient to supply me. She also brings in some cocoa from adjacent farms where the women there grow some cocoa, but they don't have enough cocoa to ferment correctly themselves. So they'll sell it to Lucy. So it's basically a very odd sort of arrangement of a co-op. Now, Lucy, as I say, is a formidable lady. She really knows what she's doing when it comes to harvesting and fermentation. And she produces excellent cocoa. When I was out there last time, and this is a really heartwarming story. I was talking to her, and her oldest daughter was there. And I was introduced to her, and I asked her what she was doing, and she said, "I'm just back from university in Brisbane." And I thought, okay, this is unusual because obviously education stops at 16 on the islands. There's no universities there. And she said, Lucy said, "It's the money I make on cocoa, selling cocoa at high prices to people like you, that enables me to educate my daughters. Both of them have been to university. So one was becoming a lawyer. I think the other one's doing business studies. And the one who's doing business studies saying, I want to come back into the farm." And this is the first time ever speaking to a cocoa farmer that I'd heard that they wanted their children to come back in the farm. Most of them will say, no, I don't want my children to become a cocoa farmer. It's hard work, you earn no money, desperate poverty. I want them to become a doctor or a dentist and earn some money. But this, because we're paying a higher premium, and Lucy grows great cocoa, she's earning money to make it all work. And it was a lovely sort of heartwarming story. And her cocoa is amazing as well. It's got this unique sort of grapefruity notes in there. It's lovely.
Yeah, I love that origin. That's one of my favorite bars from you, I think.
It's great. I mean, it's and as I say, if you could picture this sort of idyllic little grove where she ferments her cocoa in the boxes there and brings it in. No, it's really a pleasurable working with these farmers. I mean, it's easier for me because of most of these South Pacific islands, the default language is English, or if you like, Australian, because that's a sort of a big powerhouse on the block. So there's no problem in communication. You can pick up all the nuances.
Well, obviously, we're all aware of the significant problems in the global cacao supply chain with ethics and labor and things like that. Even once you get into craft chocolate, I feel like there can still be a risk of carrying a kind of colonial attitude into that relationship. Talk about how you avoid that and working with farmers as true partners instead of kind of bringing that Western colonial attitude into that relationship.
Well, firstly, I think if you don't have respect for what the farmers do, you're a fool. It's as simple as that. Let's put it down to this level. If you were a Frenchman and you were sort of producing wine, would you allow somebody else to pick your grapes and ferment your wine? No way, absolutely no way. It's so fundamental that you've got to have so much respect for what they do and understanding for what they do, because they have to harvest at just the right time. They have to ferment correctly, which is very, very difficult, very complex, and then they have to dry and organize the business on their end. And I think just if you can't appreciate what they do, you're starting on the wrong position. And I think if you have respect for what other people do, it's the best starting point you can have. I'm not going there trying to tell them what to do. I mean, they sometimes ask you what you want, because they quite often don't get to taste the chocolate. So one of my things is whenever I go back there, I take chocolate. It's quite difficult because of the heat, but I'll make sure I get chocolate back. And if the last crop I had was fantastic, I'll tell them. And if the one I've just had is not as good as the previous one, to my taste that is, I'll say, why was this one slightly different to the previous one? And we discuss it. It's an exchange. It's an exchange of equals. They're part of the process. They're part of the business.
One of the things I think that's interesting that you do with your bars is, you're making all single origins, but you're adjusting percentages, very small amounts, to really bring the most out of the beans. Talk a little bit about the importance of just those subtle differences in the percentage of cacao that you're using for different origins and what drives those decisions.
Okay, so when I have a cocoa, and I'm continuously looking at new types of cocoa, even from the existing islands or from other origins, I'll bring some cocoa back, run it down the pilot line. I'll run a test recipe, which is 72% unrefined sugar and cocoa mass, and if necessary, a touch of cocoa butter. Now, I'll roast the beans to a very regular roast profile, which I have, depending on the size of the beans. And then I'll refine and conch it to a specific particle size and for a period for over heat and temperature. So I'm producing a constant model, and I'll taste it, or we'll taste it. And by starting at that base, you can say, this one could probably do a little bit more cocoa mass in just to power it up a little bit, or actually ease back a little bit. And this is where we start from. And also at the same time, I do 100% as well. Not all beans will make 100%. Some do. And that'll give you a very good indication of how flexible you can be with this bean. So starting from this 72%, some are sort of almost spot on. You can make them a bit weaker or a bit stronger, but about 72, and you'll see that three or four in our range are at 72, which I think is a very nice, if you like, starting level to see where the flavors are. Philippines, I pushed up 1% more. It's actually 1.5%, but of cocoa mass, because it was a lighter, gentler one. I just wanted to pull it up a little bit. The Madagascar I had in, which was quite a high risk, I pushed up to a reasonably high level because I was trying to, peak these raspberry notes. 84, it was just hitting the bell. It was just a lovely note there. And then, as you say, the 100%, all beans I'll try at 100% recipe, but not all make it. And it's not that they're astringent or bitter. If you're buying good beans, you don't get that at all. It's just that they were just too overpowering at that level. The Solomon Islands 100% we make is probably one of our best sellers. And it's just such a well-behaved bean at 100%. Obviously, it's refined and conch just like the other chocolates. There's an inherent small amount of sugars in cocoa mass, enough to sort of start all the flavor developments, but you just treat it like a chocolate, and it'll talk to you. So basically, you start from a known point. You sort of do everything the same, and then you sort of say, okay, well, if we increase it or decrease it, so that's the next stage, and I make the next recipe, which is actually what I'll be doing this week.
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, my book on pairing craft beer and craft chocolate is available now on Amazon and on the Bean to Barstool shop. Pairing Beer and Chocolate, a guide to bringing the flavors of craft beer and craft chocolate together, is out now. This paperback book explains the process of pairing beer and chocolate, includes a guide to hosting a pairing at home, walks through dozens of beer styles to provide style-by-style pairing guidance, and gives room for taking your own pairing notes along the way. This is the only book on pairing beer and chocolate available. Grab your copy now at the link in the show notes or on Amazon. If you manage a tap room, bookstore, chocolate shop, or cafe and want to stock the book, get in touch about our easy wholesale process. Beer and chocolate belong together, and this book is your guide to getting the most out of every pairing. You do that with every batch you get in, even if it's a known origin you've worked with before?
Yes. Yeah. Well, for example, you and I are now on screen. Obviously, the audience won't be able to see this, but here is a bag of cocoa, which are 2 kilos, about 3 kilos. And this will be roasted tomorrow in pilot run. This is Papua New Guinea. You can tell the listeners that Martyn's just buried his head in the sack and is sniffing away. The aromas in here. They are absolutely amazing. I mean, it's very agricultural. I can pick up a couple of off notes, but there's nothing to do with the cocoa. It's because it's been dried in the sun, and we've got the volatiles still in there. Each season of beans, I'll accept a slight variation because we're talking about single origin, single plantation, and there will be a slight difference between one season and the other one. The complexities will maybe have a slightly different pitch. That's all. It'll be close enough to be very recognizable as a lovely origin. But there has been times when I've said, no, I'm not taking that. And it's not been because the farmer's done anything wrong. And in this particular case, I know why it was. And he knew why it was. It's because there was a hurricane sitting off the coast for something like 3 to 4 weeks. It just sort of sat there and gave very cloudy, actually quite cold, damp weather. And the cocoa, which was growing in 24, 25 weeks from a flower to a pod, it lost, if you like, nearly a fifth of its potential good growing weather. And the flavors weren't there. They just weren't there. So I said, look, let's have a look at the next crop. They do grow 2 crops a year, as most places, or most cocoa growing areas can do. So it's not too bad.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the tasting experience. You alluded to this earlier. Getting past the technical process of tasting, what does tasting chocolate mean to you now? You've been doing this for so long. What does it mean to you to just put a great piece of chocolate in your mouth and taste it? You're doing it right now.
I anticipated your question. So excuse me if you hear some slurping going on. What I'm looking for is initially aroma, of course. When I've made the chocolate, let it settle down, open it up, sniff it, and you should get a really strong indication of what you're going to be tasting just by inhaling the aroma. Part of the experience. Pop a piece in your mouth. I know it's going to be fine because we're running it down to about 14 to 16 microns, ultra fine. So it's not a guesswork with me, but if I'm tasting other chocolate, I'm looking at texture as well. Then I look for how it melts. Some of my recipes are a little bit of cocoa buttering because it accelerates this melt profile and allows the flavors to come through. I'm looking for the first wave, as I say, which comes in, say, the first 5 seconds. As the cocoa butter slips, you get these, how can I say, these flavors which edge their way forward to the front of your palate. And they almost overcrowd it with this lovely sensation of all these flavors. Rises to a peak, stops, and then drops down. You hit a base. It's still flavor there, but it's in a calmer sort of period for about 5 or 10 seconds. And then you'll get this second wave of flavor. Sometimes a third, but definitely the second wave. And it can be different flavors altogether. We mentioned Makira. That grapefruit note kicks in on that second wave just perfectly. It's not there in the first wave. It's there on the second wave. And then it dissipates towards the top of the wave. And then the aftertaste comes back again, like a little echo. It's wonderful. And I'm talking of aftertaste. The chocolate taste is not good until it's finished. And in some cases, that can be a very long time. I mean, 100%, you have a piece and you'll be tasting it for the next 5 minutes. But it's that aftertaste, and a good bean will give you a lovely sort of soft landing. Think of a glider landing on a grassy field, so soft and smooth. That's how your chocolate should finish. Echoes of the peak flavors. No jarring, no discordant notes.
Well, you put a lot of work into communicating flavor to your consumers with your packaging. You use descriptions, colors, different things. Talk a little bit about the thought behind how you communicate those expectations to consumers.
Yes, we don't want to sort of preach to consumers, but we don't want to rob them of the chance of enjoying it. Hence, we put the taste notes on the inside of it, and the colors on the outside will indicate, for example, on the Madagascar, there's quite a strong raspberry color. Not surprising because there's raspberry notes in it. On the Makira, you'll see that there's yellow notes typically in the grapefruit. So I think there's a lot of sort of psychology on colors and flavors. You taste fruits you think of. So I think trying to describe what you're going to be tasting. The taste notes we've got are on back of pack. We'll probably be moving to the front of pack. The danger is that if you describe the sort of flavors within the chocolate and don't make it clear that it's not flavored, some people can think it's actually flavored chocolate, which is a total mistake.
Sure.
You've really made a complete hash of it there. So what you're trying to do is saying you may get these sort of flavor peaks and troughs as you eat this chocolate. The flavors will talk to you. I mean, when I'm describing chocolate to somebody, I say, like, the best way to taste chocolate is if you're going for a walk by yourself in the woods or whatever, just put a piece of chocolate in your mouth. Try not to chew it. Just let it melt. And just let the flavors flow. Nobody's going to ask you questions. You can just look around and commune with your tongue and with nature almost, and just let the flavors talk to you. And I think in a peer group, if you're tasting it, which is a big mistake, it's quite difficult. If you ask people here about how I taste, well, they'll say, "Oh, Martyn, when he tastes, he gets up and walks away," which I do. I don't really want to make eye contact with anybody else. I don't really want to talk. And I don't want to actually be focused on anything else. So I'll just put a piece in my mouth and probably walk over to the window and just sort of stare out into nothingness while I'm letting it speak to me. And perhaps that's a little bit extreme, but I think you learn how to taste, you learn how to appreciate things. And if you have tasting notes, they can be quite good. If I'm tasting somebody else's chocolate, by the way, I'll never read the tasting notes until after I've eaten it and tasted it, just to make sure, because otherwise it's too suggestive.
Sure. As soon as I first saw your colors on the packages, I thought about Hazel Lee's Taste with Color map. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yes, I am.
When you were making these packaging choices, some of those colors are pretty intuitive. You mentioned raspberry. Some of them may be less so. Did you actually go into any kind of specific color theory or work with somebody to figure out what those colors should be?
No, not in the least. I think I came across Hazel's charts a couple of years after we started. It probably would have been damn useful actually at the time, but we didn't. I mean, one of the tricky ones, and I'm still debating whether we got it right, is on the Papua New Guinea. It's a very complex flavor in there. You've got some slight earthiness, some slight woodiness, some slight greenness, but all in a very pleasant way. And you've also got a very sort of odd haunting note in there, which I can only pick up as saying truffle. If you've ever had a fresh sliced truffle, a very thin sliver of it, almost just touched it on your tongue, and you get this unique flavor of wild truffles. There's a hint of that in there. And as a result, we're sort of looking at the colors. You've got these pinks and browns and truffly colors in there almost, which is sort of the darker ones. So yeah, did we get the colors right? I don't know.
Who does the design work?
Oh, we took on an excellent agency to do that, I must say. We gave them the brief and they came up with it. I mean, we contributed bits as we went along, like for instance, the little magma line here, yes, between the color on the top, just to sort of tie it to the volcanic soils. But no, I mean, I was quite daunted with how they would do it, but they did a marvelous job. There's a company in London who did the design work for us. No, it's lovely colors, lovely sort of expression of what it is.
You have a favorite of your own bars?
That's like saying, who's your favorite child?
That's always the response I get.
It's true. Well, firstly, it depends on the time of day and how long since you've last tasted that one. For instance, Makira, I hadn't had any Makira for about 3 weeks. I tried some last week and I thought, damn, this is good. This is my favorite. And then a few days later, I'll be going back to the Philippines saying, yeah, but this is really good. And now I go to 100% and say, why haven't I been eating this?
That's funny. What has you excited right now? You've been doing this for a while. What has you excited right now for the next thing you're going to do?
It's still finding lovely beans and flavors out there. I'm still constantly surprised on the flavor of some beans that I get. Put that into context. I receive a lot of beans, some unsolicited, and some I'll try and find that, and I'm quite disappointed. Not all beans are great in terms of what I'm looking for. Um, a lot of beans are they're okay, but they just don't really give that depth of flavour. Now, I can't blame, it could be maybe I'm not roasting correctly for that. I try and adjust my roasting to bring out the flavours, but it's like finding a treasure box. You don't know what's around the corner. You really don't. I mean, I'm so pleased to find that there's so many good beans still, so many exciting ones. It's one of it's like drinking wine. If you enjoy a glass of wine, the complexities of flavors in there. It's one of life's pleasures.
Oh, I believe within the last year or so, you put out a Dominican Republic bar. Are we going to see more bars from outside of the Pacific for you, or are those just kind of one-off things?
If the guest cocoa is good and the response is good, we'll keep it. The Dominican Republic, the beans are very good. I really love those ones. I think that one could become a regular. Now I'm working with some South American beans as well at the moment. Most of them, but not all of them, are from volcanic soils. Some of them, for example, in Madagascar, the andesite soils, the volcanic soils, are washed down into the valley rather than actually being in the valley itself. It's from the mountain range. So I've got a tenuous link there, if you like. But there is some cocoa grown on non-volcanic soil. Just finding it. It was surprising how much is actually grown on volcanic soils. Quite ironic.
What story is Firetree Chocolate telling?
Taste. It's all about taste. Yeah. It's got to taste good. I mean, depending on who you're talking to, sometimes you have to say it's equal with the sustainability and the ethics. And they are a close second, third, whichever way you want to put it. But to be honest, if the taste isn't in there, forget it. It's game over as far as I'm concerned. It has to be worth the energy of you paying the money to buy it and eating it. The calories you're absorbing, probably unnecessarily. It's a pleasure. It's got to be for taste. It's a good product because it not only gives us a living of making it here, but also helping farmers. And I don't want to be sounding preachy on this, but it's so nice to actually see that some farmers can make a good living out of it as well by doing the right thing in terms of working so hard on this beautiful agricultural product.
You can order Firetree's chocolate bars from their website or from barandcocoa.com. If you go to Bar and Cocoa through the link in the show notes as a first-time customer there, you'll get a discount on your order. Thanks to Martyn for coming on the show today, and to all of you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Bean to Barstool.